Hi everyone, welcome to this special preview of the Rebelway course Rigging in Houdini. I'm Ian Fales from beforesandafters.com. I'm a visual effects journalist covering films, games, TV shows, commercials over at beforesandafters.com. I'm really excited to talk to Owen McCubbin today about his course Rigging in Houdini. Rigging in Houdini is such an exciting area because it's actually brand new, like literally a couple of years old. In terms of the new things that you can do in Houdini rigging. But before we jump into chatting to Owen, we're going to watch his course trailer. So let's roll that now. Oh, well, that was really cool. I really love seeing that ship and the characters coming out of the ship there. What's awesome is that if you do this course, you are going to learn how to do that ship and those characters, which is really cool. So let me introduce Owen McCubbin, technical artist and animator at Serenity Forge. Hi, Owen. How are you?
Hi, it's nice to meet you, Ian. I'm doing well. Thank you for asking.
Very nice to meet you too. Whereabouts are you in the world, Owen?
I'm over in the Seattle area, so greater Seattle area, Pacific Northwest for me.
Oh, cool. Well, I'm recording this from Sydney in Australia, so I love this kind of new world that we're in where we're on opposite sides. Owen, that trailer was really cool to watch, and in a few minutes you'll be doing actually a preview presentation of your course. But I thought people might want to get to know you. So do you want to, like, where are you working now? Run through sort of the current work that you're doing, and also we'll talk about what you previously did as well.
Sure. So where I currently work is called Serenity Forge, as you said. It's a game studio that's actually located in Boulder, Colorado. So I'm actually pretty far from it. But like you
Mm.
said, this new world lets us connect over long distances. And the game I've been working on for almost a year now at Serenity Forge was announced recently, Homestead Arcana. I'm responsible for pretty much all things character pipeline, from character rigging and animating to getting things to look good in the engine and kind of doing some dynamic stuff in the game so that characters will act more lively as well. And my background is mostly in video games as well. The previous studio I was at was Sucker Punch here in the Pacific Northwest, helping bring Ghost of Tsushima Director's Cut to game consoles near you. Um,
Nice.
and but the most relevant and kind of exciting thing, that the reason why I have such a kinship with the new rigging system for Houdini was I worked at Side Effects helping teach these tools when they were first coming out. I was helping teach them to game studios like Sucker Punch and Insomniac, actually.
Oh, wow.
So
Well, then you're the perfect person to present this course. You've got sort of this insider knowledge, and also it sounds like a real appreciation for what Side Effects has done with rigging and kin effects in particular, right?
absolutely, yeah. The reason I appreciate it, even as a more of a game side of things than a film side of things, is that it was actually conceptualized for the game industry. Of course, it's very useful for the film industry as well. But Louise Cruel, the guy, one of the main uh, technical artists behind creating this tool set, he kind of was in it for helping with the game side of things. As some people might know, he was one of the heads of the game labs tool set. So it's very exciting and useful for all industries in the visual effects. So
Absolutely. I can't wait to see more about the course. Why don't you share your presentation screen and
absolutely.
I'll let you demo that. I might chime in with terrible questions about particular aspects. But you're in for a treat, everyone, with getting a bit more of an in-depth look at this course that Owen's done. So go ahead, Owen.
Sure. So we're going to be talking about the course Introduction to Kinefx Rigging. So KineFX is the new rigging system that was introduced in Houdini 18.5 and has been continued to be updated into where we are now, Houdini 19 and going into 19.5 soon. And it's gotten really cool features in it that some of them we touch on, some of them we don't, but this introduction course is meant to be a truly introduction course. So if you're trying to learn rigging for the first time and maybe you're a Houdini artist already, then this is for you. Or if you're already a rigging artist that is familiar with kind of pipelines and procedures in other softwares like Maya or Blender, then we approach this the system of rigging in Houdini kind of similar to how those DCs are set up. So your transition to Houdini should be easier as well. And it would be this course is kind of targeted for people that maybe know enough about Houdini to navigate, but you don't necessarily need to know anything about particle systems or procedural geometry generation or anything like that. If you're just looking to learn rigging, you can just hop right into this course with me. So let's talk a little bit further about kind of what character rigging is in general for those that are looking to learn character rigging for the first time. Character rigging can look different depending on what software you're in. Here we have an image of a character rig on the left that was made in Maya. And here on the right, we have a character rig that was made in Blender. And character rigging is basically the creation of all these bone-like structures in a static 3D character mesh to allow that character mesh to move how an organic creature would move. And although it's here we see two images of normal human bipeds, you can use character rigging for complex machinery that we'll touch on a little bit in this course as well and a little bit later in this presentation. So this is kind of what rigging looks like in current DCCs, where we have a bone structure and maybe a bunch of these control curves, depending on how the rig was made. Moving into what Houdini rigging looks like before 18.5 and before KineFX. And of course, these functions are still available in Houdini if you're wanting to explore older features. But before KineFX, which looks like this on the right, things were all on the object level. We can see that just in this tiny little snapshot, all these nodes that were needed to create this character rig. And it looks pretty similar to something that we just saw for like Maya, where we have these bone structures that we can kind of see under this character mesh and these control handles and curves. And it operated strangely because it was on the object level. Each bone had its own node and needed a lot of work by hand. There wasn't much of that nice proceduralism that Houdini has for character rigging. But now with KineFX, here we're over here on KineFX, everything was brought down to the Sops level. So you can play with it just like any other geometry. We don't need to worry about how things operate on that object level. We can move things as if we're moving like modeling, if we do happen to know any modeling tools. And everything is similar to how rigging is done in other DCCs now, DCCs being digital content creators like Maya. Each joint is just a point in space. And that's what they are in Houdini. They're just points with a few attributes on them. So we can make joints from any point system that we create in Houdini. So if we do happen to know particle systems or procedural line generation or anything like that, we can just put those attributes that make them joints on those points, and we get that proceduralism back. That is so nice for Houdini that we didn't have with the bone structure beforehand.
Can I interrupt you there, Owen? Because
Sure.
as I sort of mentioned up front, this is pretty new, right? As far as I remember, it was basically announced in, am I getting this wrong, 2020? Or is it even before that, that it was available in actually a 0.05 release initially, KineFX?
No, I think it was fully announced and released in 18.5 when
Mm,
just 18.5 came out flat. I think that was, yeah, right at the end of 2020 or yeah, right at the end of
mm,
2020.
mm.
So almost exactly 2 years now, was when this kind of first came widely available to the general public and to general studios across the world.
And I remember covering the release and hearing the shouts of joy from a lot of riggers who had been doing the sort of old bones thing in Houdini and had often given up and gone back to Maya or Blender. Now they could do their rigging direct with KineFX. Do you remember like the sort of like, oh, now we can do it feeling? Was that an exciting time for you as well?
Yeah, it was pretty exciting as well. So the way I got to work with side effects was I kind of built this character face rig with the bone system, which was kind of hard because
Mm,
they're bones that have length to them, and you can't really like just put up like some people for rigging in Maya for rigging like a cheek will just have a single point for the cheek that they can kind of pull out, which you can't really do with the bone system because a bone has length. How do you just pull out a whole you pull out a whole
mm,
face to your cheek? It was kind of awkward. But once I was told about KineFX a little bit earlier because I got to work
yeah.
there, I was very excited. You don't need um, as much work. You don't need to do as much work in to create a character rig as you used to in Houdini. You used to methodically have to place the bones down and really understand its weird orientations that weren't super visible. Um, Now with KineFX, they have some nice tools that will cover that just let you kind of click around and place joints down, just like other packages like Maya, and we can easily see bone orientation. We can even see it in this image a little bit, that like red line there, and we can easily manipulate those orientations and understand how our rig is actually built.
Yeah.
So it was
Awesome.
very exciting to see that.
Yeah, cool. I'll let you keep going.
Sure. Um, so let's talk about some of the unique things about KineFX. So as we were just saying, it's now on the Sops level, which we could see in this quick rundown of the node editor. Um, and as we could see, once again, talking about that easy visibility and readability and understanding the rig, we can see how all those orientations are built for each of the joints. And building this skeleton is done extremely quickly with the new skeleton sop that was introduced with KineFX. We can just click inside of our mesh, and there's some nice tools that we cover in the course that let us kind of find the center of the body without needing to worry too much. So we can like just click on the on the arm, middle of the arm, and it'll do its best to place inside the arm for best skin weight results, which is kind of something unique to Houdini that I haven't seen much in Maya. And I'm not super familiar with Blender, so you'll have to. I apologize for any users out there that are coming from Blender and maybe know some techniques that I don't know. But so this was super fast to create, even compared to Maya rigging. Then we can come over and see what kind of the skin weight data looks like, and it's very colorful. But this is a skin weight data that's been around even before KineFX, but has been introduced into KineFX. This is their biharmonic skinning method, which is very powerful for organic creatures or characters. And it's especially unique to Houdini because it uses Houdini's attribute systems to build the skin weight data, whereas other DCs don't really have Houdini's attribute system that is so integral to Houdini. So there's no way that other DCCs can actually skin so well out of the box like Houdini can with biharmonics. And we kind of explain further what biharmonics are in the course, but to just the 2-second elevator pitch is basically it skins an organic character very well right out of the box with only a few minor edits needed around choke points, basically, and it does it pretty quick compared to other packages as well, which is very powerful. It does hands really well, for instance, which is really hard in other DCCs.
Well, that's actually a really quick question I wanted to ask you.
Sure.
You're obviously showing, and you mentioned, these are bipeds, and you mentioned it can be used for other things. I think people are so used to equating rigging with a body because of the bones type thing. But basically, you can rig anything in KineFX, right? Like, it's not limited to creatures or humans, of course.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can rig anything with a rigging system. So if you have specific need for it, so maybe an example of that is if you're building a film that you want like if you have a tree character, for instance, that you want to be able to both be simulated and animated. With Houdini, you can make that possible. It's not in the realm of this course necessarily as an introduction course, but it is possible once you start to understand all aspects of Houdini. So if you understand some vellum maybe from simulation aspect of things, and you understand the rigging from this system in this course, you can combine the two and allow your rigging trees, like if you imagine the arm as a limb of the tree, you can start to affect that limb with your simulation in Houdini. And you can rig that tree with KineFX as well. So yeah, you can rig anything. And that separation of bones to just be points in KineFX really solidifies that idea as well. And you can manipulate things a lot better that way.
And I think one of the obvious benefits then, if you can do all of those things in Houdini, is that you're not necessarily jumping in and out of other tools all the time, which of course I know that people have those workflows between Maya and Houdini and other tools. But staying inside Houdini is obviously a benefit there. And also taking advantage of the best of Houdini by staying in there, I assume, Owen, is a really good thing.
Yeah, I'll touch on that a little bit more later. That's a really good point. The not needing to switch between softwares, because we'll touch on that in a second here.
Cool.
So yeah, you can rig anything. The benefit I totally forgot to mention was that if you rig a tree limb and you simulate it, but you want it to have some character that you can animate as well, you could combine that with KineFX. You don't need to separate things out. So that's the benefit of rigging and simulating at the same time, is that you can have the control of animation and have the control of simulation. Here, I'm just demoing a little bit more about that, kind of what painting skin weights looks like in Houdini and how smooth it is. There's not, in my experience with Maya at least, there's nothing quite so smooth in terms of transferring the weights, and Houdini does a really good job of keeping weights localized in their areas. So you won't get a common thing, I think, for my users is as they're editing weights, maybe they're painting on weights for their forearm or something like that, or removing weights, and suddenly the toe will have some of that weight. There's none of that frustration with Houdini. It does a very good job of keeping the weights local to where those joints are. So that's just something really powerful. Even if I've met artists at different studios like Turn 10 and other studios in this area that only use Houdini for the skin weighting aspect of things because it's so much faster and easier to just apply the bioharmonic skinning out of the box kind of skin method and to do some quick paint adjustments and move on from there. So that's a really powerful tool that we'll kind of cover. And of course, with KinEffects, we have that use of Sops and other things. Of course, this was available with 18.5 as well. It just wasn't as, or sorry, with the bone methods, so pre 18.5, where we were able to transfer the attributes of our skin weights from a low poly mesh to a high poly mesh. It just took a few extra steps because we weren't already in Sops. But now with Sops, it's super easy to go from low poly to high poly, which just allows us to paint data a lot quicker. If you've done rigging before as a prospective student for this course, you might know that high density meshes take a lot of data on the computer and can be quite slow, so and frustrating to figure out. But we go through the process of showing what it looks like to paint on a low poly mesh and apply it to our high poly mesh and fix that up from there. So now let's talk about the core of what rigging is. Although we've covered like the creation of a skeleton and the skinning of the mesh, what rigging actually is the the to move the aspects of the character. So and there's kind of two philosophies I've seen in the industry right now. There's one philosophy for creating what is called an Uber rig, which we can kind of see on the left here. It's where all of our controls and rig is set up in our scene and is just right there on the character without needing to transfer. Usually they have IK, FK blends and everything is right there compact. And that's why it's called the Uber rig, is because it's got everything you might need rigged in one space. The other kind of thought process in the industry right now is this process that was kind of brought up from Bungie. As we can see, this is a GDC talk from 2015 called tools-based rigging, or freeform rigging is what Unity calls it, where we can see that this character, they started moving it in an FK mode here, where their arms are following the spine, and FK stands for forward kinematics. It's just the natural way you can think of things, how they move. If I move my torso, my arm will move with it, kind of thing. And we can see that with their tools on the left here, they can click on a few buttons and their rig can maintain its animation with its placements and then switch over to IK. And what IK here, we can see that those hands stay in the same place. And that's essentially what IK rigging is something led by the opposite end of the joint chain. It's inverse kinematics. So instead of leading from the shoulder, we're leading from the wrist or the hand. What's powerful about the Uber rig, or rather what its benefits are, its pros, is that it's relatively easy for most new riggers to kind of produce because they don't need to know much other than the rigging tools presented in their DCCs and in their Mayas or Blenders or 3ds Maxes. They can kind of just use the 3D packages as tools to build their rig. And it doesn't require a lot of scripting knowledge. Whereas the benefits of the freeform rigging or the tools-based rigging is this ability to have more flexibility in animation and keeping data where it was and being able to switch spaces, basically. However, the cons for the Uber rig is you don't necessarily get that amount of flexibility. And the cons for the tools-based rigging is you do need to know a lot of Python or scripting and tool setup outside of rigging that maybe takes a lot of time as well to set up. The cool thing about Houdini is that if you know how to do one of these things, you kind of know how to do the other. Houdini builds off of that skeleton. Let me go back and see if you can see these points on that skeleton. Houdini's way of rigging is that we're always grabbing the skeleton wherever it may be in its animation cycle. And we can see the power of that later in this presentation. But that allows us to both build an Uber rig at the same time of building a freeform rigging. And we can separate these tools out without needing to know a lot of scripting. And what those tools are in Houdini, they're called HDAs. And they used to be called OTLs a long time ago, and that's still what their folder is called in the document searching. But we can see here that HDAs is a really important concept to know, especially particularly for rigging, rather. It may be utilized in other areas of Houdini if maybe you've built a special flame tool or whatever that you can hand off to your VFX team to produce a whole bunch of varieties of flames. And we can see HDAs used a lot throughout Houdini as well. That's just provided to us as users of Houdini. The Games Labs tools are all HDAs that were built by the Games Labs team. In this course, we cover how we create HDAs for rigging specifically and the power of HDAs as well. We can take this character that we've already covered, its skeleton that we kind of already talked about creating, and its skin weights that we created, and we can package it into a single node. And we can either hand that off to other members on our team so that they can create their own rigs, or we can continue it and continue to build other tools and HDAs that are our rigs. And what those look like, we will cover several HDA creations, and we in this course will approach things. We'll cover a wide variety of topics, but we'll kind of approach things as if we're sort of making an Uber rig. We can see here that this image demonstrates what our FKIK legs tools looks like, where we can see all the parameters that we need to edit on the side here. We can see what it looks like in our scene as well. We can see those skeleton chains, and we can see those control handles like we had seen in other DCCs as well. And here we sort of talk about later in the course how we can build a more modular system, something similar to that tools-based rigging we were talking about earlier, where we can build one HDA that can be applied to any sort of skeleton. Here we've applied it to, and we cover how we can apply it to our spaceship rig that we had here. So here we've just made what I called a modular IKFK tool, and we can apply it to any 3 bone joint chain that we might want to make into an IKFK kind of tool. And we cover that as well, how we can approach things both Uber style and more dynamically as well, so that we don't need to necessarily make tools for each and every one of our rigs if we have a wide variety of naming conventions or character rigs kind of thing. And to kind of quickly explain how Houdini can easily produce this sort of workflow without needing much Python scripting. The basic process of this, for anyone that might not know, is that we take our current animation here, and what the script does here when they hit switch is it takes their whole animation for their timeline and it bakes it out. So you then have things baked onto your joints, which then allows you to maintain that position of those joints and set up your other rigs where need be. The reason we don't need to do that in Houdini is because our rigging tools here, they grab our joint chain wherever it may be in its animation, whether it's in a running state, an idle state. We don't need to set things up before we start animating, unlike other DCCs. We can set things up in the middle of animation if we want to. If there's suddenly a tool we need and we're in the middle of animation, we can just make it on the fly there. We don't need to go back and unbind the skeleton or start over our process or make a new Python script just because we needed some new tool. We can just continue from where we are. So if we separate these FKIK tools, or even just set the state for, just use the node twice over because it's a tool that we can produce over and over again just as a node. If we just set our state in one mode as FK and our state in the next node as IK, we can bake in between those nodes and easily maintain that data without Python scripting.
And that just so seems to lock into Houdini and side effects' methodology in relation to proceduralism, right? All those things that were done with procedural modeling, geometry modification, now seem to be able to be applied to skeletons here with kineffects and the sort of Houdini workflow. It must be one of the main benefits of adopting, the rigging tools in Houdini now.
Absolutely. So one of the things we cover as well for that kind of more procedural generation of skeletons is one of the kind of annoying things to do in other DCC packages is we see these like joints in between the elbow and the wrist and between the elbow and the shoulder, all these smaller joints, I'll call them. What some people like to call those is twist joints in high fidelity rigs. It's really important for, if we can see here on my arm, just in this in this thumbnail mode here, as we twist your arm, your radii and ulna, they kind of flop over each other, right? If you think about it, and that requires a subtle twist down the arm as you go, like where my watch is follows my wrist a bit more and more towards where my arm is here. It doesn't really follow the wrist at all. If you could see that. Yeah. The importance of those twist joints is it allows us that soft transition. And we talk about setting those twist joints up. The creation of those twist joints is usually monotonous or annoying in other DCCs because either you're duplicating a joint and dragging it down consistently over and over again, or maybe you've built a script with just a few nodes in Houdini. We can easily separate just using like the divide node, the line divide node, or we can separate out into it's called a rebuild or something along those lines. Can't quite remember the name, but it rebuilds the curve that is the bone chain there, so that we can easily add in a bunch of joints real quick. And if we ever need to go back in, add more joints, maybe we could just change a slider real quick. It easily separates the bones equally. We don't need to go and change each thing. So that's a really big benefit just for this character that we're setting up. Extrapolated further, it can go much further if need be, kind of thing.
Awesome.
Yeah. So just talking further about how SOPs are useful now in kineffects. Of course, we talked a little bit about the attribute transfer earlier for character rigging and the mesh capture. Sorry. But we also then cover later in the course when we're doing more technical rigging on our spaceship, how we might access these distance nodes or other math nodes inside Houdini to allow for maybe unconventional kind of rigs, very specific solvability that we need inside of Houdini. The last kind of bit of the course that we cover is some animation. This isn't an animation course, but it is pretty integral to the kineffects pipeline. And we wanted to kind of do an introduction to an entire character pipeline, from being handed a stagnant mesh, a static mesh, and being able to put a skeleton on it, be able to then manipulate that skeleton and come up with that final character motion that we saw in the trailer earlier. So one of the things we cover is probably an aspect of Houdini that not many people look at too often, which is the animation windows, and seeing how we can do graph editors and other aspects of Houdini that probably aren't visited too often, but may need to be utilized as you approach retargeting or other animation aspects. So we do a little bit of hand animation in this course, and we create a little bit of a run. But moving forward with, like I was just talking about, retargeting, we in Houdini have the ability to take one skeleton with an animation on it, say from Mixamo, and apply it to our skeleton that we created. Here we can see the blue skeleton with the animation on it, and we can see our white skeleton that's following along with that blue skeleton and that kind of final pose that's applied to our character mesh. So even if you aren't an animator, which was the point for this course, was that maybe you aren't an animator, you can get animations that are already created and apply them to your character and then put them in a scene and get this nice final result. Moving forward with that kind of not animation, but animation kind of topic, we move into clip blending, which is where we can take different animations we've retargeted, like this running at the start, into kind of this stopping run as well. And we can hand pick how we retarget things. So if we have specific sequences we want to follow, we can design those sequences with this retargeting, or sorry, with this clip blending system. And we do that for our characters. And speaking on what we were talking about earlier about what's the benefit of rigging inside of Houdini, and why, what you were talking about, how you don't have to transfer softwares. With Autodesk's softwares, we were talking about Maya and that kind of stuff. A common pipeline might be rigging in Maya, animating in Maya, maybe doing retargeting in Motion Builder, which is another Autodesk software, and bringing it back into Maya so that then you can animate or adjust that animation. So there are pipelines out there already for this kind of thing, for retargeting and for animation. But with Houdini, you don't need to jump around doing export and import processes or jumping in through different softwares and have a bunch of different windows up kind of thing. You can just stay inside Houdini and get all the same, if not better, results from Houdini with its tool sets. So by the end of the course, we're hoping that, or rather you will be able to animate all the characters, be it these mechanical characters of the ship and these cyborgs. You'll be able to animate and kind of direct them with the different clip blending that we had. So you'll be able to start with just being handed all these stagnant meshes, the stagnant ship here, just a T-posing character. You'll be able to put a skeleton on it and grab the correct animations that you might want to see in your scene, put them on your characters and get them all moving. And by the end of the course, you'll be able to have a scene that maybe you can hand off to a VFX artist to do, like the particle systems here, which is what we kind of did here. I did the animations and stuff like that, and we handed it off to a VFX artist and they went away with it. Or if you already know some VFX like particle systems and shooting and that kind of stuff, then you can just continue and do a whole scene, just everything in it you can do at this point, starting with just geometry.
Wow. Oh, that's really cool. I mean, I think the idea that you'll be able to really take something away from this course and produce something that, you can put on your reel, I suppose, Owen, is a pretty cool thing, right?
Yeah. So it's absolutely exciting, I think.
I've got a couple of questions coming out of your awesome presentation. One of them is what I think people might be wondering in terms of signing up to the course, if they've already been doing some rigging in Maya, Max, or Blender. How do you feel like, will they be able to easily segue into rigging in Houdini with KineFX. Obviously, it's an introduction course. Tell me about that kind of thing from going from one tool to KineFX.
Absolutely. So if you're coming from another software already that you have done rigging in, you'll obviously already have a leg up on starting in Houdini because you'll know the vocabulary and the general processes or how things should look and operate. And this course will fill in the rest of the gaps basically for where the tools are and what the equivalents are for Mayas and blenders and that kind of thing. So hopping from Blender into Houdini, utilizing this course as your main guide point is a really, it should be really easy because we walk through each step as if it was another DCC. We don't really speak like it's truly Houdini. We don't necessarily go full procedural on people quite yet. So this should be both good for anyone that doesn't know rigging yet, or people coming from Maya and Blender that maybe aren't used to a procedural workflow and want to see more of that linear idea that they have. We do walk through it very start to finish kind of thing, just like a Maya or a Blender tutorial, but for Houdini.
Yeah. Well, can I just say, I really enjoyed your presentation. Having covered the industry for 20 years, I don't think I've ever learned more about rigging in 15 minutes than I did just then, Owen. So thank you personally for giving me that awesome overview of rigging. But I also feel like it's really important because Houdini its side effects tends to always be on the cusp of something new. And I've always felt like, especially when you mentioned the motion capture things there, taking a Mixamo piece of animation and applying it to your own rig, I kind of feel like that little specific thing is something that artists are going to be doing so much more of. They've already been doing it for years, but they want to do it efficiently. And so I'm guessing this course, not that you'll be going into in-depth on that in particular, but it's going to ready artists for, I guess what I'm trying to say is the future of rigging in a way. And
Absolutely.
because, rigging does change.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
Yeah.
it'll prepare people not only for the future of rigging, but the future of animation probably. Even though hand animation is super refined and you can get amazing results from it, like the Pixar's and the Disney films that we can still see. Things like Marvel's films and stuff like that, a lot of their pre-work for animation comes from that retargeting, because it's a lot easier to get that realistic acting from a motion capture suit and apply it to your rigs rather than needing to hand animate what realism looks like. You can just act it out.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited as a journalist to see where it's going in that way, both from like a technical point of view and also just the result on screen. But Owen, I did want to ask you finally, in terms of the use of KineFX in studios. Now, you're obviously working at a game studio and you had that insight at Side Effects. How do you feel like KineFX is being integrated in around the industry? As we keep saying, it's relatively new, but are you seeing a proliferation of it around the place?
Gotcha. As you might know, studios' pipelines tend to be very closed-lipped in terms of not trying to spread too much of how they do things, especially to the public. At my studio, I can say that we're definitely starting to explore Houdini more and more with future projects and how we can utilize automation that is present in Houdini. And with other studios, I've heard chatter about how they're kind of starting to see Houdini for a similar level of being able to automate. One of the aspects of Houdini that some people might know is called PDG, or TOPS network. It's the aspect of basically being able to do large scale for loop is what I'll call it. And you can use it for both file searching as well. One of the brief subjects that we cover is how we can use tops or PDG in our retargeting system. So one of the benefits of Houdini's retargeting as well is we can grab a whole library of animations, like for Mixamo or from Carnegie Mellon or any library of animations we may have, retargets that we did ourselves, and we can build a quick PDG network and say, for this whole library, this whole file set that we have in our computer, I want you to just do this retarget for each and every one and export on our skeleton that we created and our methods. And you get a whole library of your characters' animations from a whole library of their characters' animations, and you can leave that to do overnight. I'm not too certain on Motion Blender's ability to do that kind of thing without, once again, having scripting tools made custom.
Right. I think what I like to hear is that there's constant development. You know, as I keep saying, it's new. I feel like we're not far away from the next kind of KineFX announcement as well. So it's sort of an exciting time in rigging, and definitely an exciting time in Houdini. Thank God you've got a course coming, Owen, for this. And we should say that this course basically begins in early November. You can find a lot more information on it at Rebelway's website, which is rebelway.net. Owen, is there anything finally you want to say about it before we sign off?
Not so much. I'm very excited for anyone that is coming to learn with me. I'm excited to meet you all if you do come and help you build your characters.
Awesome. Well, it's great to meet you, Owen. Thank you for showing us rigging in Houdini, and I hope everyone has a look at it and signs up. Thanks again.
Thank you.